We got hit pretty hard out there. We got attacked from all ends, all sides. The enemy was everywhere. They slaughtered us, okay? Damage was cut. The flasks were killed. Archetypes were murdered. But what are we going to do about it? Patch notes are the patch notes. This is the patch we're going to play. Now, how are we going to play it? How are we going to still enjoy this? How are we going to have fun? How are we going to win? That's what I want to talk about today. Because there are things that are now very much dead, and there are things that are very much still alive. And that's what I'm going to try to convince you guys of. I'm trying to tell you that there are ways to work around what happened, or there's alternate routes to take that are still going to be fun builds to play and are still going to crush the content. And I fully believe that. First off, I want to talk about support gems. The reality is support gems got completely gutted across the board for most cases, but there are some things that survive, and there are things that are now strong go-to choices in my opinion. First off, I think you got to relearn what is the correct choice. You can't be living in the past and say, okay, if I'm playing a Fizz build, I always use Impale support. I always use this support, because maybe there's another choice that makes more sense now. You're going to want to try to rethink these things, and a lot of times, PoE can pretty much do this for you. You click the little drop down, it sorts by DPS, it'll tell you what supports are going to do the most for you, but the reality is, in a lot of these cases, you're going to have to relearn what's best and why it's the best, etc., etc. Just to give you guys some examples of what I think are now strong go-to choices, and this is going to sound weird and funny, power charge on crit, endurance charge on stun. These gems, they got a small gem mana multiplier increase, which happened across the board to pretty much everything, but their damage was untouched. So now if your build that stacks power charges or crit charge, or power charges or endurance charges, these are go-to gems. If you're stacking 7, 8, 9 of these are ended up being some of your highest damage multipliers, along with a little extra utility they give you. These are things I would look out for and including in your builds if you're those types of builds. Other supports that were untouched are added flat damage supports like added cold, added lightning, the conversion gems, fizz to lightning, cold to fire. Figure out if your build can make use of these. Maybe these supports are now your next in slot, their best go-tos. Sometimes they're going to be relatively better than a lot of the supports that got cut in half, cut into pieces. Keep those in mind. Other supports that were basically untouched were penetration supports. These things received like some of the smallest nerfs, I thought, in terms of damage output. In the patch notes, these still seem very good. They were always pretty much go-to supports in many hit-based builds. So a lot of times, if you weren't using penetration supports, just a reminder, they're really good. You should probably use them now because other supports aren't even going to come close to what these things can give you in hit-based builds a lot of the time. Other things that you need to consider now is gem scaling damage is relatively unchanged. Supports like Empower are now your best in slot for pretty much every spell build, because the power level of Empower didn't go down where everything else went down, and there are ways to build around gem levels where you don't care so much about your supports. For example, Viridi's Veil, Honor Home, Level Bows. These are all things where you can scale the levels of your skills, which the damage scaling for those is the same as before, but you're using like a helmet where you have less links, and the part of the reason those were kind of competitive with 6 links is because 6 links had 2 extra links. But since links matter a whole lot less now, and mana multipliers are a whole lot more, gem level scaling, the prime way I'd go. I'd look at getting these sorts of helmets with +2 corruptions on them. These things will be spicy. I'd highly recommend it. You get these things with +2 socket gems, throw a Val Orb at it, you might just have a best in slot for your new damage setup. Other things are essence crafted items. These didn't get nerfed either. For example, you have the glove essence craft, which is like 16% more attack and cast speed. You have the helmet craft that's 30% more elemental damage. There's stuff like this where they contribute to largely powerful items, and now they're just as strong as, if not stronger, than a lot of your other support gem choices. So you're going to want to be looking out for these essence crafts. There's a few different ones in a lot of different gear slots that could be the go-to. I think Baby Lance maybe just woke up, so I'm going to go check on him. Now, these support gem solutions don't cure the problem. Ultimately, you're still going to feel some loss, you're still going to take some damage, but it's about mitigating that damage and still creating a strong build. That's the advice I'm trying to give to you guys. And after that, I'm going to have to give you a little bit harder advice, which is look into switching it up. The reality is, your favorite build might have gotten killed. It might have gotten murdered. It might have been completely desecrated, disrespected, And the reality is, if you try to play it now after you've played it at what might have been its peak, it's going to feel real bad. And I don't think it's worth it. The feeling of seeing your build completely destroyed and trying to make it work and realizing it doesn't in the future might not be worth it. But the reality is there's a lot of other builds out there. You might find out you have a new favorite build. There are other options. I think it's worth trying to switch it up. I've played builds that have been killed, they've been destroyed, and if I go back to them, it's not necessarily a fun time. Let it rest. Try other builds. You might find out you like some new stuff. There's some cool stuff you maybe were missing out on the whole time you didn't realize you love. Some examples of this is archetypes that I think got dumpstered that I don't know if I would want to go back to if I'd played them before they got dumpstered. Spellslinger, the mana multipliers and all the support gems make this very, very hard to work in now. It's very hard to get the reservation right on this. I think it's pretty dead. Archmage got hit so many different ways, and honestly, probably still a viable build. But if you've played Archmage before and play it now, I think it's going to feel real bad in comparison. And another one is dot builds. These got really hurt in the support gem nerfs, and then they got doubly hurt by having their cluster jewels absolutely murdered. Cluster jewels were such a big part of dot builds having good damage, and I think they got the 2-for-1 Sunday special, and they're not looking so hot right now. Whereas there's other archetypes that I think you maybe could consider. Maybe they'd be worth your time. Things that I don't think got really hit very hard in these support gem nerfs and didn't really get hit hard in general. Minions, traps, bows, these are just some examples. Their support gems didn't really get gutted. They didn't really get hurt in any specific nerfs, and a lot of them maybe even received buffs to the skills that did these things. Stuff like that is what you want to consider. The reality is, though, although you might be walking away from one of your favorite builds now, that doesn't mean you're not going to be able to bring it back to life in the future. That can always happen with some buff that happens to the skill or some new item that's added. There's a reason there isn't just one Worm Blaster. There's been a Worm Blaster 2. There's been a Worm Blaster 3, 4, 5. The reality is, you can find a way to make it work even after it's been killed this many times. Eventually, it becomes a challenge. It becomes, yeah, GG, you tried to kill this build, but I revived it thing. So, I wouldn't lose hope that there's maybe still a chance to bring it back to life in the future, but I would say enjoy something that is actually still going to be viable and good now. Don't play the build you know and love when it's this dead. Give it some time to rest, give it some time to recover, then come back and enjoy it. Another thing is new skills could be winners, could be losers. This is always a risky game to play. I like to play because I like new things, but the reality is there's a big variance in new skills. You could get a winter orb on release where it's just really freaking good, or you could get something like Crackling Lance without the intensity jewel support, or the intensity jewel you put in your tree that helps you gain intensity stacks so you can actually do damage with it, and it could feel really bad on start. That's just an example of a risk. It's hard to tell off the bat a lot of times if new skills are going to be good. Kind of a risky play, but it could also lead to a really fun, really interesting league start. Just stuff to consider there. One of the biggest things, and probably the thing I'm going to close with, are flasks. Are they dead completely? In my opinion, no, but they are changed in, I think, the direction GG's trying to go for, which they're trying to make it intentional what you're doing with it. You're not just spamming these everywhere you go. And I'm going to give an example. Diamond Flask, Bottled Faith. 2 flasks, people would probably look at that, look at the changes and say, oh, those are dead on arrival. They suck now. But I'm going to give you an argument for why I think they're still good. And my example is Diamond Flask gets you 100% crit. You get the Betrayal Craft for another 60%. That's 160 there. Bottled Faith is a 150% increased crit chance. You put those together, that's 310%. There is one of those new orbs, I think it's in Kindling, or maybe it's in Stilling. I can't remember which. I'll eventually learn them. That gives 50% up to 50% effect on a flask. 310 times 50%, that's 455% increased crit chance. That is no laughing matter for crit chance. I'd say if you have a well-invested crit build, you're getting stuff like flat crit chance on your chest, you're getting Assassin's Mark already, that takes 5 base crit, somewhere between 8 and 9. You can get another 0.75 if you go for crit corrupt on gloves. You can get flat crit in a few different places like that. You could even get a weapon with good base crit. Point is, you have a 10 base crit item, that's 45 flat crit chance right there. You have basically a 50% chance to crit an enemy just from those flasks. The reality is, though, when you use those orbs to power those up, they don't gain flash charges while you use them, so it's going to make them intentional, where you can only use them, say you want to DPS a boss, that's where you're using it. The The reality is, when you're clearing maps, monsters don't have a lot of HP. You don't need that damage. I think it accomplishes what GGG wants. They don't want you to just be spamming these throughout the map. They want you to be using them intentionally, so you're not just playing Flask Piano. But they're still going to be something you want for high damage in a scenario where you're trying to burst down a boss, because that's a lot of crit chance, and it's going to make your crit very good, give you a very good opportunity to burst down bosses. It varies between Flask to Flask how much they nerfed them, but the general rule of thumb I felt when I looked through the Flask nerfs is it felt like a 30% nerf across the board to Flasks if you add on the 50% effect. You can also go for things like the duration to maybe get some Flasks where you like some nice long duration where you press it once and it lasts a while, or you can just play them with the response buttons where you say now ailments kind of suck to deal with. You can deal with them with the auto, the orb that makes it like, say you have a freeze flask, you say remove freeze, and you say it only triggers when you get frozen. Basically solves that issue, because you're not going to get frozen too much. It's when you click a box, it's when you get hit by a crit from a monster. It's not a common scenario. So if you just have a flask that auto removes that freeze, I don't feel like freeze is necessarily going to end up feeling that bad in terms of difference of the flask. There's other stuff like curse immunity, which just sucks now. But you know, I'm saying there's some reasoning behind it. Flasks still have a use, but the use case is now you're not playing piano, you're using it intentionally, you're thinking about what you're doing with it. Ultimately, we got crushed out there in these patch notes. We got hit a lot, but I think you can still make good builds. I think it's about finding the builds that got hurt the least, or the new builds that are secretly really good. It's about experimentation. It's about theory crafting. That's what PoE is to me. I don't know if it is to you or not, but I'm saying hopefully there's going to be light at the end of this tunnel. We're still going to be able to find ways to make good builds, but it might be a struggle at first, guys, and I'll be there right there with you, and I'm going to try my best to make good builds, theory craft ways we can still beat the game well and conquer it. So that's my video and advice on how to take these patch notes. I don't know. I personally, it's like I just try to not think about the builds I used to like that might be dead now. Just try to think about the future. What builds I can make, what builds can I have fun with, and that's what I'd recommend. That's how I managed to stay positive about being excited about this patch notes, or not excited about the patch notes, but excited about a new league. There's new stuff to do, new stuff to try. Anyways, that's my hot 2 cents on that. Appreciate you guys watching. You guys have an excellent rest of your day. Good luck out there, Exiles.